Hi, welcome to Haven. This is a podcast that's a safe space for curiosity and conversation. I'm your host, Haven, and today I'm curious about what's in a name. I'm actually going to pause here and ask something of you as a listener. So wherever you're listening to this, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, watching on YouTube, would you actually pause it and go subscribe so you can be a continued listener? Or maybe you're already subscribed, but you haven't rated it or reviewed. Will you please do so? I'm trying to grow this, and the way to do that is through you and through engagement. And typically I'll have this kind of call to action at the end of the episode, but if you're anything like me, the second the content's done, I'm just switching over to the next thing. So I want to put it here in the middle. I'm going to humbly ask, will you please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening to this? Thanks. What's in a name? In the sense of the Shakespeare quote from Romeo and Juliet of what's in a name, that in which we call a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. So it's basically talking about how that's just a idea. It's not anything that really is mattering when it comes to names of it's just something we call. It doesn't really affect the properties of what we're naming it. And I don't know if that's the case when it comes to humans. I think names matter. And I think what your name is based off of is a little bit of an insight into your background of whether the story you tell yourself or the story that you were told of how you were named. And one of my friends has a theory that she told me that I want to explore today, where she was saying if you go to a party and you want to get to know someone, you can just ask them, how did you get your name? And then you kind of follow where they're leading and kind of the questions. And then that is the best way to get someone's origin story, because we've all been asked at a party of like, well, tell me about yourself, or who are you? And it feels so big and so grand, and you're not really sure, like, do you want to know my childhood? Do you want to know my interests or my hobbies or anything like that? But this question is a little bit more non-invasive, but really insightful. So I want to test out that theory today with someone that I think has a very interesting name, and that is Erwin Raphael McManus.
So good to be with you, Haven.
I'm glad that you're here.
I'm glad to be here. It makes me wonder where your name came from.
We're about to find out. But I also want to talk because you have a lot of ways that people identify you. You are an author, a speaker, a designer, fashion designer, a consultant, a pastor, but I know you best and longest as a father.
Yep.
So I've been friends with your daughter, Mariah, for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to talk a little bit about how I know you that way first.
Me and Mariah are very close.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, I think, a very special, unique relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And when I remember when you first came into her life and you guys were, I think, incredibly close. I mean, she would have considered you her closest friend at that time in her life. And Mariah picks friends very slowly and very carefully. So the fact that you were in that small, little, tight, very private inner circle in her soul told me a lot about you, and which made me love you right away. And I think you went with us to England or to United Kingdom, and we traveled together there. But we don't realize that most of the time we know people not as isolated individuals, but we know them in the context of other people. Mm-hmm. That's the only way you really can understand a person. You see how they relate you to Aaron, your husband, and watching those interactions lets you know more about a person. Watching you interact with Mariah, watching you interact with other people in different environments, and so I think people are really very textured. When you only see them in an isolated sense, you only see one side of them.
I think it's true because that's a little bit of what I was alluding to. Is I've seen her through like what you guys have of that really special bond, because I did get to travel with you guys. We went to England and to Scotland, and you guys were always very, very tight and very close. It was almost like an unspoken language between the two of you. And also I got to know Kim on those trips, and you and Kim are the most generous people that I've ever met. And I feel like it speaks more of me getting to be inside your guys' home than anything you do out in the world, as I got to see up close who you guys are, you know, outside of any other like dynamic or industry. And it was really impactful to get to see what you guys were like as a couple, but also what it was like in relation to Mariah.
No, I love it. Thank you so much for that. Kim and I both have a high value for generosity and for hospitality and just for living our lives in an open way. And I remember how many times you and Aaron would just pop over to our front yard, and which, by the way, are some of Kim's favorite moments. She just loved when you would just show up, and it always made her very, very happy. And I don't think anything makes Kim happier than to entertain people.
That's true.
But not like large groups. She loves when like individuals come, or when a couple comes, or when a family comes. She's not I want to have a party with 50 people. She's, I'd love to hang out with, that couple or that person. And I think you're very similar in some ways, that you tend to like, it seems to me, very intense, singular relationships.
Oh, I loved being Kim's neighbor. It was the bomb, especially during quarantine. It would just be walking by and get to hang out on the lawn or go to the farmer's market. And she would always give our kids just the most random toys that they actually ended up loving. She one time gave Isley a little Grogu, the Baby Yoda doll, and that became her birthday theme. It became what she wanted for her outfits. Like, it really stuck. So Kim's generosity goes even to my children.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. I love that.
But okay, going into the topic.
Okay.
If we were at a party and someone asked, "How did you get your name?" What would you say?
It depends on how long I want to talk to that person.
Let's assume they were an interesting person that you wanted it to continue with.
No, because for me, that's a little bit of a complicated story. But even growing up in school, do you remember how in grade school you'd have to say your name? They'd say, tell everyone what your name is. And I remember everyone would say something like, my name is, or no, they would say, I'm Haven Wheats. But I would always say, my name is. I wouldn't say I am. Because I never really knew who I was in relationship to my name, because my name's an alias. And so I never was called my real name at any time in my life from memory. And McManus is an alias because my mom remarried a guy that was involved in what we called creative underground economies. And so he ran away from a family he was working with in Chicago and disappeared to Miami. His partner had been shot and killed. And he met my mom, and 3 weeks later they were married. And then we came from El Salvador, which is where I'm from. He took us to a police station, convinced the police we'd been robbed and that we lost all of our identity. And so I walked out McManus. So I had an alias from the age of 8 or something, 10 years old. And suddenly I was Irish and, being completely Spanish. And then my first name is not my name either. I went back to El Salvador and I asked my grandfather to give me a good American name. I just wanted a name that would fit in. My birth name was actually Jewish, which was unusual. And so it always created conflict, always put me in situations for fights. The first day of school, it was just nonstop ridicule. So I just wanted a good American name, but my grandfather didn't know a good American name. I just wanted to be called like Dan, or Jason, or Aaron, or, just a good, solid American name. And my grandfather had been studying World War II history, so he names me after Hitler's general over North Africa, Erwin Rommel. So now I have a German, quote, Nazi first name and an Irish last name. And then my middle name, Raphael, it's almost my name. And I never knew how to spell my name. No one told me what my name was, really. And so I went to a movie when I was a little boy, and I saw this actor's name, Raphael, with a PH. So I wrote that down, and that's how I started writing my name. But my actual name is written R-A-F-A-E-L, because Raphael with a PH is Italian, and Raphael with an F is Spanish. So even that's misspelled. So my whole name is a misunderstanding. And so when you think about getting your identity from your name, from your family, my identity was already just really fragmented from my earliest memories of my life. So I never knew who I was. So I would just say, my name is this. And I always kept it separate from me. And if you think about the importance of names, when you have names like Carpenter and Fisher, Taylor, Smith, all those last names are actually the trades that the fathers had that they passed on to their sons. So you are a blacksmith or a tailor or a carpenter or a fisherman. And so names were actually connected to a family identity, to a family legacy. And so when you take that over history, and then you add it to living your whole life with an alias. And so when someone asks me, where did my name come from? It's a little confusing in some ways because I don't know. And then because I didn't know my real father, even on my birth certificate, my name is still unclear. I don't actually know what my real name is. But I know in my birth certificate, in that whole paragraph, I'm Cardona y Carvajal, Mesa Sandoval, Paspinta. It's like there's all these other names in there. And, and so that's my origin story is I don't know what my origin is. And I remember one day, my wife was McManus, my son was McManus, and I was still a Cardona. And so I went to a judge and asked him to change my name legally to McManus. And I thought about changing my name back to either Cardona or Sandoval or Mesa or, something in my real names or a Mesquita. I wasn't even sure which one was my real name. And finally I decided that I would never know what my name was, but I can know what my name was becoming. And because my wife was McManus and my son was McManus. And so there's some sense where I just decided I was starting an entirely new generation of a people. Like to me, I was the first one of a tribe. And Kim and I just decided to make this our name.
Wow.
Yeah. Even this week, Kim said, maybe we should go back to your Spanish name. Right?
Really?
And because I almost did that 30 years ago. But for reasons in my family, I didn't. But it's one of those funny things. You just you make your name what it is. Sometimes you're given a name and it has meaning, and sometimes you have to bring meaning to your name.
You said you were 8 when you started identifying yourself as my name is. Did you ever say I am?
No, never.
Never.
No, I don't remember ever going to school with my real name. Because Spanish was my first language. So when I went to school in the States, I didn't speak English and I couldn't really understand anyone. I learned English really fast, but I pretended that I couldn't speak English because I didn't get grades. So I realized the longer they thought I couldn't understand, the longer I could go without getting grades. So
that's clever.
I kind of milked that system as long as I could. And my mom told me that when she took me to first grade or something, the teacher leaned over and said, would you like to speak in English or Spanish? And my mom said, I looked at her and said, do you speak Spanish? And she said, no. And he goes, well, then I guess we'll have to do English.
Wow.
And so she said, you were already being sarcastic. No.
Even as a kid.
Even as a child. But,
did your brother have the same struggle?
he's a little bit older than me, 2 years older than me. He didn't seem to have the same struggle of identity that I did, or at least he didn't express it the same way as I did, because his first name and middle name are his real names. And he was given the name Alexander, which is kind of a, awesome name. He was named after Alexander the Great, so he had no identity issues.
Yeah, it's pretty epic.
Yes, he has a pretty epic name, and so he's, he was Alexander Francesco, and so it just fit him. And I think also he was just awesome. He was incredibly intelligent, a great athlete, just a natural born leader. So I think some of it is, he had all the attributes from the get-go that matched a name like Alexander. And I was 5 years old in first grade, so I didn't realize I was younger than everyone else, because you don't know that. So I thought I was the anemic twin, because my brother and I were in the same grade. He's 7, I'm 5.
You were in the same grade?
Yes, from kindergarten through 12th grade. We graduated high school together.
2 years apart, same grade.
Yeah, because it was easier for my mom to put us both in the same grade. And so I'm going through school going, I'm really smaller and slower and weaker than everyone. And so it created in me a drive, because I just assumed I was less than everyone. So I had to work harder or I would never be able to compete. And my brother was a little bit older than everyone. So he was really developed. He was the fastest kid in the United States in 6th grade. I mean, can you imagine like having that person as your brother going, you're going to be slow next to your brother because he's just that fast. He was the quarterback, broke all the passing records for our high school football team and conference. So all the comparisons for me were against someone extraordinarily talented. So I always saw myself as an incredibly untalented person. So I look back and I'm actually really thankful that I didn't know I was 5 and they were 7. I just thought that I had a disadvantage, which created in me really strong mental structures where I just thought, you're never going to have the advantage. So you're going to have to create your own advantage. And it really makes a difference, I think.
Did your mom or grandfather ever pick up that that's how you were interpreting things?
No, the world wasn't as aware of all the complexities of human development. I mean, we're really aware now of things. We understand child development. We understand mental structures. We understand neurological, dynamics. Back then, it wasn't like that at all. It was just go to school.
Yeah.
Just do your homework.
Be seen, not heard.
Yeah. And I look back and I remember my mom was teaching my brother how to tell time. And I said, I want to learn. They go, you're too young. So I just stood in the back and I learned how to tell time by myself. And so they didn't teach me and they didn't know I could tell time. And I just told myself, no one's going to teach you. That's just the framework I developed. You just have to hustle and figure out how to do this yourself. What I did have is I had a grandfather in El Salvador, and he gave me mental structures from a really early age that helped me because at the age of 3, he taught me how to play chess. And so I'm playing chess against my older brother and my grandfather. So I'm getting killed, right? I never win. I don't know what a victory looks like, but I do know what checkmate looks like because I experienced it every single time. And my grandfather was ruthless. He would not let you have a move. And when I would cry, I was 5. I'd say, let me move. And he says, when you earn a move, you can have a move. And so I learned early on, no one's going to give you any space. No one's going to give you a square. No one's going to give you a move. You have to earn it. And every decision I make will either end my future or expand it. And so from the age of 3, he gave me an environment where I learned strategic thinking. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And he didn't treat us like we were children because we're in El Salvador, so we're sort of trapped. We can't go outside. It's really dangerous. And he's bringing maps out. I'm 5 years old and showing me continental drift and how the Asians migrated across North America from Asia and how the Asian population became the indigenous Native Americans and Central and South Americans. And he just walked me through it. He goes, when you go to the United States, they're going to tell you you're not an American. And what you tell them is, yes, I am. America is a continent, not a country. Like he would teach me how to have a larger narrative over the smaller thinking of people. And he goes, and people are going to call you an Indian because the Europeans made a mistake and came to the wrong continent. And he would say to me, do not let people define you by their mistakes. These are all things I was learning at 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. And so more than having a name. Oh, and by the way, the reason I couldn't change my name from Irwin, even though I hated that name, it was just an absolute curse. But my grandfather made a big ordeal. He said, un nombre in Spanish. He's like, a name. It can't be just any name. He goes, it has to be in the name of a genius. It has to be the name of a leader. It has to be the name of someone who changes the world. And he's going on in Spanish. I'm thinking, no, it doesn't. It just has to be a name that doesn't get me in a fight. It just has to be a name that other people like. Like I just wanted to be accepted. But my grandfather's literally speaking into my life, you have to have a name of someone who changes the world. And so when he names me Irwin, even though I hated the name, I couldn't give it up because it was the one time someone looked at me and said, you want to be average, but you were not born for that. And so he branded me with this name Irwin, which I hated, but I loved what it entailed. I loved what it carried. And so, until I die, every time my name Irwin is used, the story that my grandfather infused into me, that it had to be a name that carried genius and leadership and significance, and you have to make a difference in the world. That's always a part of my story.
Now a quick pause to hear from my sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Efficienade. Efficienade offers fractional virtual assistants whose sole purpose is to help people who are making a difference. Are you bogged down in your email and still managing your own calendar? Delegating those tasks to a high-caliber career assistant can free you up to utilize your time towards the areas of your best and highest use, allowing you to focus on the areas you truly thrive in. Learn more at efficienade.com. That's efficient, AIDE.com. Okay, back to the episode.
One more thing I want to let you know about is we are doing our first ever Haven Book Club. We're reading Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and the author herself has so graciously offered to come and do a live Q&A with us at the end of our discussion. So we're doing it Thursday, June 27th. If you want to join or hear more information about it, email hello@havenpod.com. We'd love to have you a part of the book club. Do you think you would have reached your capacity without the adversity that life brought you and the difficulty your grandfather intentionally brought to you?
Well, I don't think I've hit my capacity. So I'm hoping that one day before I die, I actually achieve a little bit more. But no, you're exactly right. I don't think I would have become the person I am without my grandfather speaking in my life, without even the challenges and difficulties and even the trauma that I went through. But I will say that two people can go through the same circumstance and come out very different. You can go through the same trauma and come out very different. What they gave me that I think made the difference is the internal mental structures, and that allowed me to reinterpret life. You know, and so I think some of it was just one never feeling like I didn't deserve life to be hard. Like life was hard. And it wasn't that I was being punished. It's just life. And I think some people feel like when life is hard, they're being punished or someone is against them or God doesn't love them. And I never had that. I just thought life is hard because that's what it is in real life. And then you have to rise above that. And so I think that my grandfather especially put those constructs in me, and they really not just saved my life, you know, in many ways, but actually helped me begin to build my life.
How'd you take those same frameworks with your own children? Did you add nurturing, or like how did you want to pass?
Did I add nurturing?
I mean, it sounds like that was a little absent of what you had described.
I've never quite put it like that, but yes, I don't think nurturing was in the top 10 strengths or talents of my family system. And yeah, I'm trying to look back. My grandmother had some nurturing instincts in her, and she was very sweet. And at times, you know, my mom's more of an entrepreneur, you know, more of a driven businesswoman. You know, so yeah, she wasn't like a natural nurturer or anything like that, you know, and she wasn't nurtured. And so much of nurturing, I think, is passed on. Like it's environmental, you know, it's relational, it's taught. And, but I think some people need more nurturing than other people. I think some people have a more tender, gentle spirit, and there's just a higher, I think, need for it. I mean, I ended up in the psychiatric chair by the time I was 10 years old. So I clearly needed more nurturing than I got, you know? And I did feel a deep sense of aloneness, like in the world. And I had two younger sisters, half sisters. And ironically, I think that it flipped for me. I felt it really important for me to nurture them. And so I really just poured a lot of love into them and tried to make sure they felt cared for and valued. And so ironically, maybe the nurturing environment or dynamic was something that I ended up giving, you know, and so it didn't feel absent because I was giving it, even though I wasn't receiving it, if that makes sense at all.
It does, because it's very similar to my husband Aaron's story. Like he is very nurturing, very empathetic. And he came out of a tragedy to develop that. And I don't think it was poured into him the same way either.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't poured into us, you know, and other great characteristics, you know, hopefully were passed on, but not that one.
But how did you want to teach your kids the same type of lessons? Like, did you intentionally want to put them in adversity too?
No, I think it was well, I think I felt torn in some ways. I wanted my kids to always know they were completely loved. And I think I worked really hard to just wrap them up in love. But I didn't want to make them soft, you know, and so I would push them into really dangerous situations and purposely put them in environments that challenged them and that made life feel real. And so both Aaron and Mariah, I think by the time they were 15 years old, had traveled to over 30 countries around the world. And I remember when Mariah was really young, maybe, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years old. I'm not great in chronology, but Kim was like worried that she was too focused on things, too materialistic. She's, you know, 9, but, you know, high standards from Kim, right? You know, and so part of our solution of that was we took her to Indonesia to be in a world where people were more impoverished and really struggling. And I remember the first day, all these little children just came running who were incredibly poor, and they just surrounded Mariah, and the people with us, we'll go pull her out, and said, no, let her be there. And she absorbed that. And I remember when she came back, she was just like the most generous, like empathetic, caring person for other people. I think sometimes it's just putting people in an environment where they're awakened to the best part of themselves. That was always inside of her. It just, she hadn't been in an environment where it was needed. And I actually think sometimes that's what's missing. Sometimes we try to take care of our kids so much and love them so much and protect them so much that the best part of who they are doesn't seem to be needed in the world. And so they don't realize there's a contribution that they can make, that they actually want to make, that will make them a more enriched human being. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to move into environments where they realized their contribution mattered. I wasn't trying to make life hard. I was showing them that life needed their help. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
How did you land on Aaron and Mariah if you knew the weight of being given a name that you didn't feel fit you? How did you select their names?
Very difficult because I'm married.
Enough said.
Yeah. And, you know, and so I don't know how it works out in your family, in your marriage, but, you know, since there's 2 of us, the percentages break down to like 90-10.
I figured that was coming.
Yeah. So, you know, I got 10% input and she got 90%. And
what were your ideas? What were your proposals?
You know, it doesn't matter. I had other names. and I'm a little more eccentric, you know, and Kim was a little more straightforward in what she wanted to name them at that time. But I will say the reason I settled on Aaron was because I hated the name Irwin, but I wanted a name that had some kind of frequency resonance with my name. And so I named him Aaron because it was the name I liked that was closest to Irwin. And so that's part of the reason I chose that name. And with Mariah, we had another name, and then she was born. We didn't name her right away. We went to the front desk at the hospital, and I said, what's the most popular name? And it was the same name we're going to pick, so we said, we're not going to pick that name. We wanted to pick a name that wasn't popular, and at that time, Mariah wasn't popular. And part of it for me was I had met this woman years ago named Mariah with an O, and she was one of the most lovely human beings that I ever met. She was an older woman. I was probably 19, 20, 21 years old, and she just was really elegant and intelligent and thoughtful. So I always had an affinity to the sound of that name. And then I saw the play, I think it was Oklahoma, when it says they call the wind Mariah, which is, you know, where Mariah comes from. And so that was still inside of me. And Kim and I both settled on that in the middle of that. So that's where their names came from. And I knew that if I gave them a name that was too bizarre that I really liked, they probably would hate me later. But I didn't want to give them a name so common that they felt it was too common, so they would pick a different name for themselves. You know, but ironically, I grew up always calling them Catcher in Rye.
I remember that.
Yeah, because that was my favorite book in many ways, was The Catcher in the Rye. And it was probably when they were 10 years old, I gave them that book. We were traveling to Tokyo and had them read that book. And I just loved the whole metaphor of being a catcher in the rye. And so to me, they were like my catcher in the rye. And so it ended up being his nickname, and it's a part of her actual name. And I still basically call her Rye.
Do you feel like the names that you had in mind that were bizarre would have fit them?
I do. Yeah, I do. And even the one that wasn't so bizarre, I almost wanted to name Aaron Noah. And it wasn't that popular then, but I liked I'm very aesthetic, so it's about the feeling of a word and its roundedness or its softness or the imagery it places inside of you emotionally, you know. And but also did like the metaphor of the person that God starts the future of humanity with. You know, that Noah was the person that God, when he needed to start things over again, thought, this is the person I can start everything with. And I just like the imagery of saying, I don't know who you are. You're just born into the world, but I just know there's a future. There's a future waiting to be born through you.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
What is the name that you had in mind if you were going to change yours?
I don't know. You know, I've gone through a lot of iterations on that. What's ironic is I love my name when it's pronounced in Ireland.
Really?
It's called Irwin. And it's just a slight pronunciation difference. And if I had gone to Ireland early enough, I would have just changed the way people pronounce my name. I just didn't like the way it sounds, and you can't pronounce Irwin if you're Latin or if you're Asian. And so I go, okay, and most of the world can't even pronounce Irwin. My own mom can't pronounce my name, you know? And so it's just, you go to Latin America and you end up being Edwin, you end up being a million other things. And even my grandfather who named me couldn't pronounce Irwin. And so it's really, really pretty funny. And so for me, it was more the sound of it, you know, and, but yeah, I don't really think about that as much. Well, I think of aliases, I do, you know, and, but I don't try to speak those out because I think my words have power, and sometimes when I say it, I almost feel like I'm going to end up being that. So I just try to keep it to myself.
Just internal for when you check into a hotel room under an alias name.
I have companies with other names.
That's so interesting. Okay. So do you think that theory is true then? That if you can ask someone, where'd you get your name, that you could uncover their origin story?
Well, I don't know. Where'd you get your name?
Mine?
Yeah.
Mine came from my mom when she was in her early 20s. She taught a Sunday school, and there was a little girl named Haven, and she thought, whenever I have a little girl, I just think it's the most beautiful, unique name I've ever heard.
It is a beautiful name. I love it. It's really very unique. And I do think that if a person knows where their name came from, it adds something really unique to their story. And yeah, I know. I think, but I know a lot of people, they just named after my dad, or my parents just picked it.
But even then, I do think that you can uncover if you ask the right questions afterwards. Like, my dad just picked it. Like, okay, did your dad always make decisions in your home? Like, did he ever weigh into your mom? Or how did he come up with the name? I feel like if you ask the follow-up questions, I do think it can excavate a little more to someone's origin story, maybe.
Well, of course. But you might also want to ask them, do you like your name? Because I think that will tell you more about them. Because in some odd way, your name either fits you or it doesn't. And it has more to do with your own sense of identity. Where you go, no, I don't like my name. Well, why? You know, I mean, because really, what's a name? Right? I mean, if you're named Tom, does it change your essence? And yet it does change people's perception. And so when someone hears Haven, I think they immediately go, "Oh, you're unexpected,"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it's very different than if your name is Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's inescapable that names have an attachment of meaning
Mm-hmm.
around them.
Is naming more about the parent than about the thing being named?
Oh, absolutely. It's about the namer,
Mm-hmm.
not the namee.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the name is definitely, it's someone's pronouncement on you
Mm-hmm.
in some way. And which is, I think, a really powerful thing that we have to realize that we are in some ways carrying the momentum of someone else's dream or intention for us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like I love my mother's name, Cardona, you know, and that's the name I always resonated with most. When I was going to change it, I was going to change it to Cardona, not my father's name, because I don't really know my father's name. But my mom didn't want me to, because she said, I don't want people to think I had you out of wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, I'm a full-grown man. No one's even going to be thinking that anymore. People who would have
Mm-hmm.
thought that, they've all passed away,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I didn't do that because she felt uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
But when I look into my soul, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like a Cardona.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if people really wanted to know me, they'd have to know that name.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have someone tell me years ago, and I thought it was the coolest thing, decades ago, when I was still thinking about changing my name from Irwin. And he said, you know, some people, their name makes them, but you're going to make your name.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very predictive. He said, I guarantee you the way you're going to live your life, your name's actually going to become popular.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, I don't think it'll become popular in terms of people wanting to choose that name, but I hope it becomes popular in terms of it's a name people admire
Mm-hmm.
because they knew me.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back and I think it's odd. Like, you would think Oscar is a great name,
Mm-hmm.
but then you have Oscar Wilde and you go, ooh.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes it's like the first name by itself, it doesn't carry that kind of romanticism or that kind of power or that kind of you know, nobility. But then you put it in the context of the person,
Mm-hmm.
and it changes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is Elvis really that great of a name?
Mm-hmm.
Or did it become a great name because of Elvis Presley? And there to me, there are a lot of names like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought, I want to live my life in such a unique way that when someone sees Erwin Raphael McManus, they go, oh, that was a really unique person.
So how much of it is the story we tell ourselves? So you didn't like the story about your name, so then you changed it and you said, and that was your intention of the story of how Irwin like came to be and what you want it to be in the future. Can
Well,
anyone?
what I originally didn't like is how people reacted to my name,
You didn't like how people reacted.
because my birth name was Irving,
Mm-hmm.
and which I would never even tell people for years and years and years because I just felt so embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
But why are you embarrassed about a name? You're only embarrassed by a name by how people react to it.
Mm-hmm.
So once I moved to the States and lived in Miami, whenever I said my name was Irving, the first day of school was just brutal.
Hmm.
Nothing but taunting and harassment. And Irving says, beat me up. It was the guarantee of having a fight on the first day of school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very odd. If your name is Frank, they're just not going to treat you the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to get rid of the name, not because I instinctively knew it was a bad name. I knew how other people treated people with that name.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think sometimes we understand that names are social constructs
Mm-hmm.
that let other people know who you are and how they should relate to you.
So if someone has a name that they're not proud of or they don't like the reaction it's getting, what would you say to them about like their interpretation of their name?
Change the way you say your name. Like when I would walk in, and for years, and this is when I was single, like when girls would go, what's your name? I'd go, McManus. I wouldn't say Irwin because I was so ashamed of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I had to say my first name, I'd go, it's Irwin.
Mm-hmm.
Irwin. Like, and just the whole intonation let you know it was a bad name.
Hmm.
And I would walk in a room and they go, what's your name? I go, Irwin. When I said it with confidence
Mm-hmm.
and with like definitiveness that this is my name, the reaction was completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, a huge part of it now is what do I carry in that name?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is if you hate your name, say it like you love it.
Mm-hmm.
And people will respond as if they love it.
Mm-hmm.
Because really what they're responding to is your own frequency of
Mhm.
how you feel about you.
That's an interesting take. It is different in the tone of how even just hearing it that way is like you kind of even feel in your posture how you're saying it. What is your take on women taking men's last names? Do you feel like it's a loss of identity? Do you think it's a merging of a family?
Somehow I knew we were going to get over here.
How?
And this is interesting. I've thought a lot about this from the dad perspective because, you know, with Mariah, like in my mind, she's still Mariah McManus Goss. But the hardest thing I think psychologically I've ever had to do is tell myself she's Mariah Goss. And it's like losing an organ for me, like losing a heart or a soul or something. And yet I'm so happy she found her love of her life that I celebrate her being Goss. And so I have mixed feelings because I felt it from both ends. Like from Kim's side, marrying me, like I actually thought to myself, what's my right to have her change her name to my name when I don't even have a real name? It wasn't even my legal name. She was McManus before I was. And, you know, and yet what I did feel was Kim was saying, I want to like be a part of you. And I don't know, and I know this is incredibly old school. I don't know if I would have wanted to marry someone who would not have wanted my name.
What would that have meant to you?
That she wanted to be two people that had not really, in a sense, become one. And you know, and so I joke about it because Kim's last name was Lunsford. And so I go, oh, McManus is a great upgrade. You know, but then her mom's maiden name is McMahon. So I go, that's actually a derivative of McManus. So she's the only real Irish person in her family.
She looks like a McManus.
She does. She's the one that actually looks like she carries the last name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know there are things that might be antiquated of people taking on names. I don't have it as a problem. Well, I don't see it as a problem at all. People can choose whatever they want. I think it's a loss when what's missing is such an intense love that you want to be merged together as one family. I think it's a gain if you go, my family name has so much significance and so much value that I don't want to lose that too. And so I think it's not about what you do, but why you do it, that it makes a difference. Like if, I don't know, you know, if let's say if Kim's family had been direct relationships from Abraham Lincoln, and her name was, you know, Kimberly Lincoln, and she said, I want to keep my family legacy, I would have said, hey, we're all becoming Lincolns.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because there's deep meaning in that, you know, and you're bringing something with you along the way. But ironically, I think it was hard for Kim when I said I want to become Cardona. I could tell it was hard for her because she didn't really want to have a Spanish last name because she could easily identify with McManus, but she couldn't identify with Cardona. And so I there's a lot there psychologically that I don't think I even fully understand, you know, and I understand in ancient times it had more to do with almost like a sense of property that, you know, the wife then ended up belonging to the husband. But on the flip side, I also think it was a sense of like you become a clan together, and the name has protection for everyone in the clan. So I just, you know, I think the world changes, and you just have to adapt to what people feel is comfortable for them. Ironically, so many times when I meet couples where the wife has one last name and the husband has another last name, you can feel a separation between them. So I go, I don't think it's just the name. I think there's still something that each person has held onto that keeps them from being truly integrated as a couple. You know, and I think that's more important is, you know, are you now like a tribe, a clan, family together? And whatever the last name is fine. Maybe every family should create their own third name. Who knows? You know, and maybe that's what it's going to come to one day, right? You know, and but how far does it go? Because let's say, all right, you keep your dad's name,
Mhm.
but you don't keep your mom's name.
Right.
So when women go, I'm not going to submit to the patriarchy, I go, you already have. You're carrying your father's name down. If you really want to be principled, you give up your dad's name, you take your mom's name, and you pass the matriarchal name down from generation to generation, which, by the way, is what Spanish people do. Cardona is my mother's name. And every Spanish family actually carries their mother's name, and in some part of them. That's why my name is so long, because we just don't give up anything.
Well, that's the way that it came up for me, is I had never really thought too much about it until Carlos and Zoti. And then she was like, our children are Pimentel Garcia, because she was like, this is my heritage and Carlos is coming together there. And I had never thought of like, what do you think of hyphenating, or does that still kind of change the...
Well, that's what all Latin families do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just Latin America, right? But the problem is that it always ends, because when they get married, they only take one half of it. So someone gets left behind, whether you like it or not. And it always ends up being mom, whether you recognize it or not, because you're not taking your mom's matriarchal name, you're taking your dad's patriarchal name. So it's two patriarchies fighting for dominion. It's an illusion when you think you're making a matriarchal decision.
When you were talking before of your example with, like, if Kim had the name Lincoln, do you ever think sometimes a name has a weight that comes with it that you feel like just burdens you down?
Absolutely. I think McManus carries weight. And it carries weight for Aaron and Mariah, for both of them, positive and negative. And worked really hard to create a name that has a legacy to it. And I actually do think it'll be very hard for them to detach from our name, because we fought so hard to create it. And I think that's the way you should do it. You should do it in such a way where your kids want to carry like the shield of your name, because they want to carry the legacy of what you fought for, what you worked for with your life.
That's really beautiful. I like how you worded that. With thinking about to how you were changing from like, it was an alias, I don't really know about it, to making that decision, where is the line between rewriting your story and just kind of either being delusional or not honest about the past?
I think it's important to realize that your memories, your history, are the memories not of your experiences, but of your responses to those experiences. And so when you remember something, what you're remembering is what you felt. What you remember is how you responded to it. It feels like an objective memory, but it's actually a subjective memory. And that's why, have you ever had a memory with one of your siblings and they remembered it completely different than you?
Yeah.
And it's the exact same moment. You're both there. But it's because both of you had different responses to that moment. And so I think it's really important when you go, well, what about rewriting your story? What you're actually doing is you're re-remembering. And sometimes what you're having to do is you're having to infuse the vaccine of optimism. when you go back and you realize, I have this negative memory. And those negative memories can haunt you throughout your entire life. And it's really hard to unremember a memory you've actually had 1,000 times, because your brain doesn't distinguish between when it happened and when you remembered it. It's exactly the same. So you have to go back, instead of trying to forget the memory, you have to go back and infuse optimism, hope into that memory and go, what did I learn out of that? Where did I grow out of that? What strength was I able to develop out of that? And so once you begin to remember it differently, it changes its weight and the force of impact on who you are. And so I was able to look back on my life and go, wow, there are 5 or 6 negative memories that I thought about all the time. I would just always go back to them. And I was never going to unremember them. So I had to re-remember them and go, oh yeah, I went through that. And this is what's come out of that that's made me better. Oh yeah, I did go through that. And that was really painful. And I was really depressed. And I was really bitter. And then I chose to rise above that. And this is what's come out of that. And so it's not about rewriting, in a sense, your story where you're not telling the truth. it's rewriting your story in a way where you have a different meta narrative. Like, yeah, I went through this, but this is who I became, not this. And it changes everything. And it changed my life dramatically when I started going back and re-remembering those painful experiences. And it's the weirdest thing because I don't feel like any bitterness at all. I don't feel any even regret. Like I don't feel any negative emotions toward anyone or anything that ever happened to me, no matter how bad it was. Because I think I've trained myself to extract out of those moments something that made me a better human being. Even if it just made me kinder, even if it just made me more compassionate. Maybe all I got out of that was I went through so much pain, I can empathize with other people. And it changed me for the better.
I find it difficult to interview you because I really just want to enjoy what you're saying and not think about the next question after what you're saying. I just want to let it settle.
Oh, thank you.
I think that was really, I think it's an important takeaway because I think majoritively when I was kind of polling this idea, most people either aren't fond of their name or don't feel like there's any weight to it or see any significance in it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about our culture who is picking fun names without any necessarily like depth or meaning like another culture would, you know, of saying like, this is what my name means and this is, you know, the background to it. What do you think about how it's popular these days to just pick an interesting name like Apple or something?
Well, Apple's a huge name if you just add it to a computer.
True.
And,
or to be the daughter of Chris Martin.
Yeah, that's right. You know, I think when you have a name like Apple, it's going to be really significant because your dad is Chris Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think it's about who names you. And when that person names you out of love, and that person names you with intention, and that person names you out of romance and affection, that name is going to be really special to you. And I think actually if I had a way of attaching any level of affection or attention or meaning to my name, I would not even change my first name. But because I didn't have any connection to any meaning or any purpose or any significance around my name, it didn't have any intrinsic value to me at all. If they had said to me, you have that name because that was your father's name,
mm-hmm.
or that was your grandfather's name, and you know, he traveled from Spain to El Salvador, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, you know, or and if they had just attached some meaning to the name, then the name would have had greater meaning to me. So I think any name, no matter how outlandish and how crazy, just throwing syllables together
mm-hmm.
into a soup, if you're giving that name with love and intention, it's going to be a beautiful name. And that child will actually end up strangely loving it, even though they'll tell you they hate it.
See, I think that's the case with my name, as I think I love it. It's fun that it's unique. I like, you know, that aspect. But to me, the story that I'll tell myself is my mom always wanted me. Like
Mm-hmm.
before I was born, she knew and dreamed about me and had named me and loved me before I even existed. So to me, I feel like, oh, like I look back at my origin story of like, it's such a gift to always be loved and
mm-hmm.
wanted. And I think it's kind of what you're saying as far as like the name of like, it's so much of it is, even if you don't like it, if it's Frank, you know, but
mm-hmm.
if someone was like, oh, I chose Frank for you, and it was, you know, someone else who impacted me named Frank, I feel like that's also sometimes the weight of being
mm-hmm.
named after someone, even if it's a boring name, that like it does feel like an anchor to legacy or lineage.
Yeah, I did too. And whether we like it or not, we humans are, you could say we're superficial enough where every aspect of us really matters to us,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the clothes we wear, the way we cut our hair, the words we choose, the music we listen to, where we choose to live, everything is an expression of our identity, and our name even more so. Now, I remember years ago, my publisher called me up, and when I was not a writer with any influence, and they said, hey, we're going to shorten your name just to Erwin McManus because it doesn't fit on the cover, Erwin Raphael McManus. And I remember calling and talking to the president of the publishing company. I said, when you let me change your name, I'll let you change mine. And fighting for my name actually made me care about my name more. And for some reason, and maybe it's just a psychological, thing, but I don't remember a time in my life where I didn't want to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer in elementary school. And I was a storyteller, and I wrote and created characters from first, second, third grade. And when I put my name on a book, and it said Erwin Raphael McManus, it was probably the first time I loved my name. And, I just, it's crazy, but I just go, there's Edgar Allan Poe. There's I kept thinking of great writers who had three names, and it's funny because I don't use Erwin Raphael McManus almost anything, but when I write, that's my name. And in some odd way, that's the person who writes those books. Erwin McManus doesn't write those books. Erwin Raphael McManus writes those books.
It is interesting on the identity is everywhere, even in your name and how it's expressed and the tone in which you say it and what context you're using your full name or not. And I appreciate you even just sharing a little bit about your background, and it makes me think too of how your granddaughter, Juno Boogie McManus, Goss, she's carrying it on.
Yeah.
She got the name, and you're a part of her origin story. And I think that's really tender and special that she'll look back, and when someone asks her name, that it'll have the anchor coming back to you too.
Yeah, and I remember when Mariah and Jake were telling us the name. Of course, Kim had lots of opinions, and she was like, I don't know if I like that name. And I said, I do. I know you love it. So what? And I said, whatever her name is, that's the name we love.
That's the only right move when someone's telling you what they're naming their child.
Yeah, and it's funny. I cannot look at Juno and not think that she's a Juno. She is Juno Boogie. I mean, there's just no way around that to me. And isn't it kind of awesome that we give a human being a name, and then they get to fill it out? It's almost as if they're letting us know who they are, that you didn't know that name was so big and so beautiful. And that to me is part of the fun of it.
Well, thank you for coming on. I also want to add your book on here, because a lot of what you shared were the concepts in Mind Shift. I think I devoured it in one day.
Oh, awesome.
And I think anyone listening would really enjoy it. So it's in every airport I've been in.
I know, I love it. People have been sending me photographs around the world.
Yeah.
In the Middle East and Asia, that Mind Shift is there. So I'm amazed. I'm so grateful. And thanks so much for pulling it up.
Well, no, I appreciate it. I've seen it. If you're in the LA, New York, or Denver airport, that's where I've seen it. But you can obviously get it on Amazon. But I really appreciate you taking the time. You have one of the craziest schedules of anyone I know. So thank you for intentionally being here with me.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. You can rate, review, follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, just Haven the Podcast or whatever you're already listening to this on. You can also follow, like, share on TikTok and Instagram at Haven the Podcast. And you can sign up for my monthly newsletter at havenpod.com. So that's it. I hope that maybe you got an interesting conversation starter for the next party you go to, of not only asking, how'd you get your name, but do you like your name? And tell me how it goes. Email in hello@havenpod.com and let me know your findings. Thanks.